Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and tonight I am joined by Kevin McCluskey for an Acsom bulletin with a difference. We are looking at the Celts at the Euros, Kev, and that tonight involves a Scotland side who have just been pummeled 5-1 by the hosts, Germany. I read a message at halftime saying, "This is hurting my eyes." How did you feel after the game? And I think they meant the game rather than our stream.
Well, I would like to hope so. And for once, I think we might be right in saying that. Aye, that was dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. My eyes also will not thank me for sitting through the 90 odd minutes of that game. It was disaster, start to finish. There's no game plan from Scotland tonight. I don't even know if we would say they set up with damage limitation in mind from the beginning because it was so defensive. But the way that they played certainly wasn't playing damage limitation football because they just allowed Germany so much time, space in the ball. They were creating chances at will. We didn't have a shot at goal or a corner in the whole of the first half. I think it's taken us until about an hour before we get the first shot. It was just a horrible, horrible game of football to sit and watch. I'm glad I don't have to do that every other week watching Celtic, to be fair, because it would make it a hard graft.
It would. There's been times in the past since Celtic, since Acsom rather, was born 7 years ago, where Jim Orr has said that he really admires fans of provincial football clubs. And his argument is, to continually go back for another pasting and another pasting. And at the beginning of every season, Kev, we talk about, and we'll be talking about it at the end of this pre-season, of course, what your aspirations are for your team. And, as a Celtic fan, I've always had this aspiration of you win the league. That's your priority. You want to win a double, right? You want one of the cups. If you get the two of them, fantastic. I would never ever take a treble for granted because I know and I remember when Martin O'Neill won a treble that he was just the second manager to do so at Celtic Football Club. It was the third time Celtic had done it. 67, of course, 69 and 2000 and 2001. So the treble thing's great. And then you have aspirations for Europe. What does that look like? What does progression look like? And I'm watching that there tonight. And I've been talking about, my memories of the Euros and the World Cup tournaments. And I've said all week, my first real memories to be completely invested in a European Championships was 1988. Of course, Scotland weren't in it. And then the World Cup, remembering 86, but not really being so into it that I had to watch it. That was all retrospective. And I'm trying to imagine what it's like to be a member of the Tartan Army, whereby I'm not saying I don't, support Scotland. I want Scotland to win, but I'm not there. I haven't worked my family holidays around a trip to Germany, my finances, the whole shooting match, right? And I was watching the footage throughout today, and I was getting some messages from you and Boy Martin, who's in Germany, sending me videos of the fan zones and everything, Kevin. You're looking at it thinking, what a commitment. And I always say this about Celtic fans going abroad for our European adventures. Unbelievable commitment. But what is the state of mind? This is what I want to try and talk about tonight, right? Because we could go on about he should have been tighter on the third goal. We got away with one with the goal that was chopped off, or did we? He was a football boot offside. They've absolutely destroyed us. The final score's 5-1. It could have been 7-1. It could have been just about anything. They didn't have the same application in the second half, understandably, as they did in the first, right? So 5-1, home and host for the Germans. But what is the mentality? And is it a mentality that really is systematic of some of the Scottish football problems that we face? Me and Jim had a great discussion today about the absolute nonsensical Mulroney, Scottish president, or SFA president, and his views on VAR, the head of referees, and Hampden. And you might be sitting there thinking, what's that got to do? Well, it all filters down. The fact that we can't produce good enough footballers, the fact that we have no youth academy set up to speak of, the fact that, we're starting getting into the finals and Steve Clark keeps going on about being positive and why are we so dour and negative as a nation? Well, I'm not. But I look at the SFA, I look at from the very top of the tree downwards, shambolic. Kev, shambolic. And then I look at those fans and I think, wow, I take my hat off to you guys. But see, when you score your goal and you start singing the national anthem and you think, this is what we're here for. I'm sorry, I'm not built like that. I don't want to go anywhere and get beat 4-1, never mind 5. So what is the mentality? And feel free to get stuck into me for saying this in the comments, but I don't want to be a glorious loser in anything, especially when it comes to the thing we talk about every single day, Kev, which is football. I don't want to be an embarrassment when we come up against a decent side or a decent nation. And you can say, oh, these things are very, very deep. That's why I'm mentioning President of the SFA. This is why I'm mentioning the fact that we are shambolic at the very top of the tree. I think Steve Clarke's done incredible work to get us to where we are because we weren't even qualifying for a generation. And we might still get through, something Scotland have never done in the finals. We might still do it, even after that pasting we've just taken there. But there's a mentality thing that I'm not really used to because we're normally talking about Celtic. And the mentality of Celtic is one of success. And then you flip it and you watch Scotland, it's almost this admission of, we're rubbish, but we're here and having a great time. So let's sing the national anthem. I don't get that. I really don't understand it.
Struggle with it a lot myself as well. I've always been fan of the national team because I am Scottish. I want Scotland to win, but it really affects me in any major way when Scotland don't, and not in the same way as it does when Celtic lose a game. It's because you're more connected to Celtic. You're more connected to your club. You watch the game in the stadium or on TV or wherever, but you watch the Celtic game every single week. You're connected to it. You live and breathe it for the entire season. And then when the national team comes along, it's a bit of a distraction. It's something different. But yeah, the mentality of everything to do with Scottish football is not right. And you can take it from the very top and you can take it down to the level of the fan. Because you've got this Tartan Army, famous Tartan Army. They just want to go there for the party, and that's all they're interested in. Really, it's we're just happy to be there, and that's the wrong mentality to have. I mean, it's great, go and enjoy yourselves while you're there, but always go into a competition, into every game, even as a fan, believing that you can win, and come away gutted when you get thumped 5-1 by Germany. I mean, if you take us as the example, a couple of seasons ago, you and I sat here doing Celtic Real Madrid. First game back in the Champions League for a decade or whatever it was. You're playing against the most successful club side in the world. And we were sitting here discussing how we were going to win that game. We genuinely believed that we could at one point,
At half
You
time.
got there, you got yourself there. At half time, 0-0, we've given them a right game. If we get the first goal, we're saying in the second half, we could do this. And that's what you need. And even as a fan, you can't influence what happens on the pitch that much, but you just need to believe that you can win the games and frequently be pissed off when we don't win because it means something to you. Just being there isn't enough. So yeah, when we get that goal back at 4-1, there should be ironic celebration of it a wee bit, and then you let it go, and the team shuts up shop for the final 3 minutes of the game or whatever it is, and we see a 4-1 defeat, which is a lot better than a 5-1 defeat. Certainly in terms of goal difference, that extra goal could make all the difference. But yeah, I don't quite get the mentality. I think it's maybe something that a lot of the Tartan Army and Scottish fans don't follow Celtic, don't follow any of the bigger teams in Scotland. And this is their jolly, this is their thing. And from club football, they don't take big aspirations in of winning games and they carry that on into the national team. But it is something that's in the Scottish psyche, I think. And if we want to change how we perform in football or in any sport, we need to change that mentality and actually believe that we're not just there to make up the numbers and that we can actually make an impact on a tournament if we really gave it our best. And can't say we did that tonight.
Well, this is the thing, because we were poor. We know we were up against a quality side, but Scotland were poor. And, we barely got into a groove in the first half. Second half, you're thinking that this could be anything because we're down to 10 men. There was that sense of Atletico Madrid away, last season when Maeda gets sent off, you think we're already up against it. We know the quality of this side. We've seen them at Celtic Park. We were able to contain them and come away with a 2-2 draw at home. But away from home, they're a different beast, and we're down to 10 men. And it's a player that you're missing who defensively is absolutely vital to Celtic. And you just knew, you had that sense, Kevin, that we were going to be absolutely dismantled. And that's what happened. And tonight, watching the game, and the reason I started off with mentality is these words are often mentioned, to cover a massive discussion point. I think it is something prevalent to the Scottish game. I think that when you've got a president who actually believes somehow that the head of referees being Willie Collum's a good idea, Hampden Park being a good stadium, VAR being very, very good for Scottish football, you look at it and think, what hope do we have? And I've said in the past, and I try to make parallels with Celtic, that when someone who thinks a bit differently, maybe they've got an entrepreneurial flair, different ideas, diversity of creative thought, they come into that scenario and they don't last. And the example I've used in Scottish football terms is Brian McClair. And the example that I use at Celtic in recent times is Don Mackay. Now, I don't know how successful Don Mackay would have been at Celtic because he wasn't given the chance to be successful. And it's a wee bit like that with Brian McClair. Now Chalky is, for me, one of the best discussions you'll ever have in the world of Celtic. And I'm looking forward to him joining us on This Is Acsom one of these Friday nights. But he can't publicly talk about his departure from the SFA for obvious reasons. You sign a deal, there's a non-disclosure, etc., etc. But that man, in terms of forward thinking and implementing, from youth right up to the top of the tree, right up to international football, implementing these ideas, he was swatted away until he was the type of guy that didn't want to be there because he felt useless, like a eunuch in a harem, as a great man once said. So I do feel it's been an interesting experience tonight. This is the first time we've ever covered a team that's not Celtic, right? And the reason we did it is because there were obviously 4 Celts in the squad. There's a few ex-Celts in there. There's a sprinkling of rumours involving some of the other guys that are in the squad maybe joining Celtic. So it's interesting. And also, we're missing the football, Kev, and we wanted to cover a game of football, right? But watching it, it's interesting because it's almost as if you're taken into a different zone that isn't your own comfort zone, because we do demand. We're very demanding as Celtic fans, I believe. I don't see it as being entitled. I think we're very demanding, which is different. And I'm just thinking, what is the Tartan Army's demands? Just 3 games and away down the road with a few memories. And is that what it's down to? Because I'd much rather compete.
I think as Celtic fans, we've got high standards. I don't think it's been entitled about anything. Like you were saying before, start every season, the goal is to win the league, and then you want to win a cup. And if you can come away with a double, it's a really good season, and a treble makes it an amazing season because they're so historically so difficult to win until this last decade. But we just have high standards. We expect that the players go out in the park, they play to a certain style, and there's a certain level of commitment. And if we get that from the team week in, week out, especially when we come up against stronger opposition in Europe, we're generally going to be pretty satisfied with them. But you do get the feeling that Scotland totally buys into this glorious loser mentality or whatever. Like we've never made it out the group stage of a major tournament, and that's our thing, that's our niche. We need to escape that. Mentioning Brian McClair, I mean, I think me, you, and Ian have had a few discussions about him in post-match shows. I'd love to see him back at Celtic Park in a role. He could be a director of football or sporting director, whatever title you want to give him, and just let him run the football operations of the club.
Or
He seems like
a shaman that you go to speak to every time you've got a problem, and he'll give you the answer.
Yes,
that's Brian McClair.
Even that,
we need that.
That's Brian McClair. Yeah, because he seems like he's a guy he is forward thinking. He knows what he wants. He knows what he wants to do. He would have been great with the SFA if they'd only had the notion to keep him. But I'd love to see him in some role at Celtic in the future, or now actually in the present. Never mind the future. But yeah, for the whole thing with Scotland and the mindset and the way we operate, it all needs to change. It's got to change from the top. We're going to play a team in the final game that I know very well, Hungary, and they're the example that we need to follow. And I'm not just saying that because I'm here and I know the team, like they've invested so much money in like the MLS here, the Hungarian Football Association. It's invested so much money in youth academies that there's second division teams out here in Hungary that will have far better setups than half the teams in the Scottish Premiership. You know, they've got bespoke campuses. The young players live at the training fields. So they get schooled there. They come out and they train every single day. They're in that environment, and the amount of technically gifted players that's coming through has risen massively over the last couple of seasons. To the point that maybe when boys are 15, 16 years old, they're getting signed up by teams in Italy or Germany, and they're going there and they're continuing their football development. We don't really have that. You know, even if you look at Celtic, McGregor, Ralston are the last academy graduates to come out and do anything. McGregor's been in the team for the last 6, 7 seasons. Ralston's been around the team for that length of time as well. Every other season, we should have at least one youth team player that's really knocking on the door and challenging for the first team. And it should be the same across the country, and it's just not happening. There's no incentive for it to happen, I don't think. So clubs are not going to invest money in a youth system where they don't see it benefiting them. So there needs to be some sort of change from top to bottom. And once you do that, and you start to develop that, just a different mindset that actually we want to develop winners, modern football players, then things might start to change. But right now, no, it's not going to, because it's always the same people in the same room sharing the same ideas. It's an echo chamber and nothing changes. Um, and then that transmits to the fans as well, because they're not seeing any change, and it is just about going to the game, getting a few pints, having a sing song, and watching glorious failure and being happy with it.
Yeah,
And you should
but
never be happy with that.
nah, because we talk about mentality. There's also the culture. Oh, and you'll have worked for a company at some point in your life, Kev, where you walk in and you can see things that are easily fixed or could be done better. And the answer you get is, we've always done it that way. So we're not changing it.
Yeah.
And it's a wee bit like that with Scottish football. And it does drop down into the psyche of the fan base, which is very, very unfortunate. And I love the fact that you've got a great knowledge of Hungarian football, and the fact that every outlet in British football has been in touch to talk to you in the last couple of weeks is tremendous. And hopefully you've got an agent to deal with all that as well. AGSC Tech, I do feel sorry for the fans who have lashed out thousands to get that in return. We speak about this. I know that we're making kind of examples between being a Celtic fan and being a Scotland fan, but we talk about this in terms of Champions League, and the attitude I used to harken back to was Ian Bank here, where it was this attitude of, we can't compete, so why try? And you think, well, what about the people buying the package for the Champions League at home? What about the fans who then go to the away games? I always use this example when I was in a hotel on one of the away days, talking to someone in the hotel foyer who was at his like 103rd away game in his life for Celtic in Europe. I'm talking European away days, and you're thinking, wow, the commitment, the financial commitment, the whole thing, unbelievable. So you've got to think about that. They're being mugged off. It's all right for the officials to get the old jolly over to these tournaments. And I remember when doing my Nearly Mocking book, Nearly Mocking was in the 1954 Scotland World Cup squad, right? And he was in that squad alongside Willie Fernie and Bobby Evans. And I'm wondering if maybe Bobby Collins was in it as well. Certainly 3 Celts were in that squad. Celtic had won the double that season, right? And Celtic's then chairman, Robert Kelly, decided that he was going to reward the Celtic side for winning the double by taking them to the World Cup in 1954. So the entire squad went to the World Cup, but 3 or 4 of the Celts were in the squad. And speaking to Neely's son, Neely kept everything. So he had his itineraries and all that kind of stuff, Kev, from the World Cup. And you know how many players we took to the World Cup? 13. We took 13 players to the 1954 World Cup. We took more SFA officials and wives to the World Cup. So not much has changed since 1954, it's got to be said. And another example I'll always go back to was when I interviewed Jock Brown, who spoke about his brother Craig being, and still is, the last manager to get us to the World Cup finals, 1998. And at that point, for a number of different reasons, the prize money of these tournaments is astronomical. You know, you go to a World Cup, you make a lot of money. And for other various other income streams that Scotland had at that time, some of which was lottery funding, they found themselves with a bounty of £50 million in 1998. And Craig Brown, to his credit, wanted to erect 50 all-weather football pitches to be used all year round, free of charge, in Scotland. And the way that his vision kind of was set up was that within a radius of X miles, if you were a young footballer who wanted a game of football, you can go and play football. And there'd be floodlights, and you could play any day, 365, free of charge. And it cost something like £1 million per pitch. So he was going to get 50 pitches in Scotland. He pitched it to the SFA. The SFA knocked it back and spent all the money on Hampden, which is one of the worst football stadiums ever to go and watch a game of football in, especially if you're behind the goals. So it shows you the narrow-mindedness of those making the big decisions in Scottish football, Kev. And it does get to that point. Listen, we could go out, get a win against Switzerland, a draw against Hungary, qualify, and all this kind of chat takes a back seat. But a night like tonight, I think, is, you can talk about the performance being really poor, of course you can, but there's bigger issues here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Before we go into that one, during the game tonight, as it was getting to that point where it looked like we were going to get an absolute hammering, I'd started to Google for what was Scotland's biggest ever defeat in a tournament match. It was in
1954 World Cup.
Yes, Nearly Mockin played in the game
We did 7-1
against Uruguay, 7-0.
Mm.
7-0 against Uruguay. So, yeah, we were almost at that level tonight.
Wasn't far off it. Wasn't far off it, really.
Far off it. And by the way, that story about Craig Brown sums up Scottish football.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anytime somebody in any sort of position of authority comes up with this really good idea, like Brian McClure before, Craig Brown, why don't we put these 50 all-weather pitches, free access, let the kids go and play football, open the game up to people, and then it gets knocked back to redevelop Hampden. I remember Hampden getting redeveloped, and it didn't make it any better.
No.
You still had the big gap behind the goals. The facilities for the fans, certainly at the Celtic end, were still pretty shoddy. There was nothing that was really good. I think what they actually did was it was something there was indoor training facilities or something, or warm-up facilities, I think is what they spent the money on in the dressing rooms. There was nothing really for the fans. So even spending the money in the stadium, it didn't benefit anyone that actually went to watch the game. It didn't encourage that. So there's major problems in Scottish football. So we could win the next two games. We could get 6 points out the next two games and finish the group in second place and qualify, but it doesn't change the fact that there's things that aren't right. We would need to make big changes, but it's the same problem that you've got with Celtic in the boardroom, is you've got people that have been there for 20 years telling someone else who's been there for 20 years the same pile of nonsense, and they believe it, and they pat each other on the back, and they just carry on.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the SFA. Like you say, echo chamber, it needs a major overhaul, but you can't see it happening because turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So I don't know how you force the change, but it needs to happen somehow.
Well, that 98 story that I often go back to, especially in times of, I'd say, crisis or realisation of where you are in the pecking order when it comes to world soccer. The flip side of that was Japan. And at that point, 1998, you look at their, for example, World Cup record from 1930 to 1994, did not qualify, did not enter, or were suspended from FIFA. So they qualified for 1998, got to the group stage. Their record since then has been nothing short of remarkable. And throughout my life, if you had asked me which of the two was a football nation, I'd say Scotland is a football nation. The Japanese Federation has got their act together. We speak to Liam Carrigan about it all the time. They've got a 100-year plan to improve and develop and progress Japanese football, and they're doing it. We're not. Yeah, we've got into 2 tournaments in a row, brilliant, but we're not developing as a football nation. And when Craig Brown wanted to implement 50 all-weather football parks all around Scotland, it was with a view to developing a generation of football talent, Kev, that we would have been seeing over the last 10, 15 years flourishing, potentially for the national team. The same thing happened in Japan, in actual fact, when tennis courts were left to ruin and were overgrown, etc. And the equivalent of the Ministry of Sport in Japan decided to change them all into, get this, all-weather football parks. And they have qualified and continue to qualify. 98 group stage, 2002 last 16, then a group stage, last 16 group stage, last 16, last 16. That's their record of World Cup appearances since 1998. Scotland's record, we've never qualified. So I think it speaks volumes for where we are in terms of football. And I think Tony's there. I believe Tony's in Germany, isn't he?
I'm not sure. He might very well be. I wouldn't be surprised because he goes to
probably cycled.
all the tournaments.
He just pops up on his bike.
Just
cycled. All over Munich right now, various nationalities are patting tartan-clad pasty jocks saying, well, hard luck. Meanwhile, 6'5" Germans are looking down on them all. It's tough. Sounds like he's there.
It does indeed. Well, I hope he enjoys himself despite the football. But do you know, when you're talking there about all the other nations that have put these plans into place and done something to develop their game, you just need to look at Germany. I think it was after the 2010 World Cup when they were rotten. They had the big reboot, and it's Raphael Honigstein's book, and Das Reboot is all about that. When they just, as a football federation, they decided that what they were doing was harming the game. And they just changed everything. They went on to youth development. They kind of invested heavily in the academy system. They invested heavily in coaching because it's fine to have fancy facilities. If you don't have the high level of coaches, you're never going to develop. They then took a risk on bringing through young coaches, and now you've got Nagelsmann, who's 38 or something like that. He's younger than me and you, and he's the coach of the German national team.
Very young.
So you get away there. But it's, to use John Hughes' phrase, they had the testicular fortitude to make the big change, and it's worked. Fine, they started from a stronger position than Scotland does. Got a position of strength. They had more money to invest, but we can do something similar within our own limits if we want to. Right? We can invest in youth. We can invest in coaches. We can follow the systems that the big teams play and try and learn from them. Because when you watch that tonight, I mean, we're developing players for football that was played 30 years ago. McKenna, Hanley, Porteous at the back, tall, slow, immobile players playing against Musiala, Wirtz, even Fulkrug when he came on. He's a big lad, but he's got decent movement about him. We don't stand a chance in the modern game because we've not been coaching our players to play a modern game. And that needs to change. That's the biggest thing. So we need our own kind of Das Reboot, I think, of Scottish football, and actually just let go of ourselves. Get over ourselves. We don't have an identity anymore as a national team, so let's create a new one.
Yeah, ground zero, year zero. Mike Mulroney is going to be at the helm. What's his book going to be called? We searched the Americas and the Australias. We got Willie
Mulroney, the Alloa owner, is he not as well? I mean,
chairman, yeah.
I don't want to be too disparaging because I'm born fairly close to that town. But I mean, surely we need to have somebody at the head of the game who's got a bit more nous than Alloa, a part-time club that's never going to get any higher than mid-table in the championship at best.
Yeah,
That
you're right.
man cannot lead the game.
it's leading us nowhere. Let's be honest, right? And by the way, I know I'm feeding into this thing that Steve Clarke's been going on about all week about the negativity around the Scottish game, etc. But you watched that tonight, Stevie, and it's hard to disagree. Joe Fulham, Callum, there's wee Jimmy Johnston, and I think he's telling one of the Inter Milan players, "I want your jersey after the game." I think that's that famous scene. That's before the game. He's pointing over. You see him. He's wanting an Inter Milan jersey. Callum should retire and save himself for club football. There comes a point in every player's career where that needs to be an option, I guess. He wasn't at his best tonight. Is that knee-jerk, Kev?
Possibly, but only because I'd never thought about it before now. Because he's 30 now, is he not? Callum McGregor?
30, 31.
So
31 today,
31.
actually. Yeah.
31 today. There you go. So he's got years left in him for sure. But if this is the standard that Scotland want to set for the next 4 years, then he should retire from international football after this tournament, because he's not going to achieve anything. He'll achieve as much not playing for us as he will playing for us, because this kind of performance that we put in tonight, with that attitude of let's just, I don't know, try and defend but not really defend, let's not have a go, let's be really negative and dull, it doesn't suit him. So probably selfishly, from a Celtic point of view, if we can't progress out of the group, then wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if he did hang up his boots internationally and we get that extra benefit of a fresh Callum McGregor after every international break.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to the point where you become selfish. You think about Celtic and only Celtic. And maybe, I would say, would be the answer I would give, but it always comes down to the player, of course. I don't think Callum thinks that he's over the hill. He's 31 today. He still plays a hell of a lot of football, club football. And I think that his international caps have probably taken a spike in the last 3 or 4 years. He wasn't winning a lot of caps in his early 20s like a Paul McStay did, Kev. So maybe he wants to make up for lost time, but he needs to prioritise his club football and Celtic. So the state of mind, says David, of Scotland and nation, we love freedom, but ironically rejected our own freedom. 10 years ago, I voted for independence. On that day, when the vote came in, I was getting married. On that day, 18th of September, 2014. Celtic were playing in Europe. And obviously that took precedence over anything else that was happening that evening. Wakaso scored for Celtic. Away from
is
home.
this Salzburg away?
You remember that? 2 each?
I did. Aye.
Scott Brown scored as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Freedom. Well, that's fair enough, because that's in a political sense. But I think in terms of football, you need quality. You need to believe that you can have success. And I've heard many, many times in the past as well, Kev, teams like Celtic being blamed for the demise of Scottish football and all this kind of stuff. I don't subscribe to it. When you look, and I'm just trying to look for the actual point that was made here in relation to Scottish football and the fact that we've always been poor, I'll find it and I'll bring it up. I disagree with that. I don't think we've always been poor. So I'm going to bring up the Scottish 1986 squad, right? So when Scotland went to the World Cup 1986, I mentioned this earlier when Jim was on, right? And when you look at the team that we had, absolutely no chance have we always been poor, right? So when you think of players like, you might want to say he was quality, but he was, Graham Souness. He was playing at Sampdoria at the time. He was one of the main men in the Scotland squad. You had Stevie Archibald at that point applying his trade for Barcelona. Paul McStay, the maestro, playing in midfield. Your goalkeeper at that time, Jim Leighton, who obviously was so good at Aberdeen, that brilliant 1980s Aberdeen side that he ended up moved to Manchester United. You had in defence, Richard Gough, Maurice Malpass, Alex McLeish, Willie Miller. The two guys at the heart of the Aberdeen defence that won European trophies and beat Real Madrid. Kev, this was a quality side full of homegrown talents. Gordon Strachan in midfield, Roy Aitken, Jim Bett, unbelievable. And then you move into the kind of flair players. I've mentioned Steve Archibald already, Frank McAvenny, Graham Sharp, Charlie Nicholas, Paul Sturrock, David Cooper. unbelievable squad we had, and that was just 1986. So I don't think it's fair to say we've never produced a decent team. We absolutely have.
Oh.
And we've done it more often than the 1986 World Cup squad. But I look at the squad now and I think it's bereft of that consistency throughout the squad. I look at the centre halves and I'm looking for my McLeish or my Willie Miller. They're nowhere near it. Nowhere near it. I'm looking at the forward players there. The ones I've already mentioned, add into the equation Ali McCoist, Maurice Johnston, all right, I know no booing at the back, Brian McClare and Kenny Dalglish. The four players weren't in the squad. And look at the quality we had up top. So I don't subscribe to the fact that we've never produced good footballers or a good team. We absolutely have. But we're not doing it just now, are we?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking through that squad as well. I called it up when you were reading out some of the names, and it's a great squad.
Unbelievable squad, yeah.
And yeah, it's a squad that, arguably on paper could be better than the current squad, right? So we could produce good players.
Most of them are 70-year-old.
I know, that's right, they'd still do it. But we had the squad in '78, did we not? Like, this is before my time, but the squad in '78 that went to Argentina, was that not the one that was going to go and win the World Cup because there was such high hopes? So we were able to do it then. '82, I don't really know. I don't know if we made the World Cup, again, before my time. '86, just reading that squad there, loads of good players. Even Italia '90, we had a good squad then as well. It was largely the bulk of that '86 squad, I think, and a few new players like Pat Nevin and the likes would probably have been in by then as well. And looking at the '86 squad, the amount of players from Aberdeen and Dundee United that were in there.
Yeah.
Like, the back pairing of McLeish and Miller was Aberdeen. Like you say, it was winning European trophies. It was beating Real Madrid. I think, am I right in saying that the last team to have beaten Real Madrid in a European final? It's an insane record. So to say that it's Celtic's fault or Celtic and Rangers' fault that Scotland doesn't have a good team anymore is bizarre to say. We weren't producing the bulk of the national team then. It was other teams. So what's happened to them? Where's their talent list gone? There was a production line and it stopped. Was it because all the money went into the English Premiership and then players were getting pulled away down there? But if it was, surely they would still be being developed.
2 Celtic players in that squad, Paul McStay and Roy Aitken. 2 players. That was it.
2, yeah. So I mean, two very good players, of course, but we didn't make up the bulk of the squad. So yeah, something must have happened.
One Rangers player, Kev. One Rangers player. David Cooper, just one.
I'm going to check. David Cooper.
Yeah.
There we go. So I mean, that's it, and that's at a time when neither Celtic and Rangers were really the dominant force, or we were certainly being challenged by your Aberdeens and Dundee Uniteds. So I think those clubs have got to look at themselves. It's really easy to blame Celtic and Rangers because we've got the biggest fan base, but they've got to look at themselves and think, like, what were we doing that we then stopped doing? What do we need to do again? Like, how did we stop producing these talented players? Are we not finding them anymore? Is it because facilities aren't there? And if they're not there, we need to put them there. Is it because we don't have the coaching? Is it because numerous other reasons? But it's not a Celtic and Rangers issue that Scotland doesn't have a strong national team and doesn't have the players coming through. You've got to look at all the other professional clubs in the country, and every one of them needs to shoulder their own bit of responsibility. And the thing is, if they started to produce the players again, you'd have a stronger domestic league, which would make it far more interesting and exciting for outside viewers. You'd then get bigger TV deals, revenue would go up that way, and you would enhance the game even more. But there just seems to be an acceptance in the game that those days are gone and they'll never come back. So why try to bring them back? And we've got a stick that we can beat another team with, so we'll just use that instead, and it takes the burden off of us.
Well, I'm looking at it now and wondering if there is such a platform similar to a Celtic state of mind for the Tartan Army. And if so, if they're all just sitting there saying, what a great night that was. It was brilliant. What an atmosphere. Because if that is the mentality, fair enough, it's just not mine. It just is not mine, Kev. So fair play to anybody who is over there As I say, I got some brilliant footage from you and Boy Martin. He was having a good time. You know, the fan zone absolutely mobbed. Everybody having a great time. Hopefully that continues. I don't expect there to be any trouble. But we move on to Wednesday. We will cover that game as well. If you can handle it, if you can suffer it, we will be here on Wednesday night as well. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. Earlier on tonight, episode 3 of This is Acsom went onto the channel. It's with Bobby Petta. Go and check it out. It's brilliant. It's a 1.5 hour show. And Bobby was once almost signed by Ange Postecoglou. Go and check it out to see what the circumstances of that were as well. So thank you all for getting involved. And all that's left for me to say is thank you once again, Kevin McCluskey, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Nice one.